Hello, everyone, and welcome to another panel here at Negative Space. I'll just jump in real quick and apologize for the lateness. We were having some issues with our connectivity, but it looks like everything's kind of figured out now. Quick announcements from me, like usual. Let's see. I'm sure you all have heard, but we successfully crowdfunded our anthology last week, which is amazing and feels so good from us here at Negative Space. We have an awesome book to put out for you all now. And I feel like I've said this a million times at this point, but I can't begin to thank everyone that supported the campaign, shared what we're doing, told a friend, everything, because it really means a lot to us at Negative Space and the 15 other people that are going to be on this book, sharing their stories and really making a huge step forward in their career because of this book. So thank you all for that. Last little announcement, everyone should have seen, or I hope they saw, today was supposed to be our regular deadline for our fall 2022 competition. We are extending that to Sunday. We just got a chance to announce our mentors last night, and we want to give everyone a chance to get to know them before our regular deadline is up. So go check it out. If you know anyone that is looking to submit to that competition, it's open to everyone, all scripts, all genres, 22 to 28 pages. And yeah, regular deadline is on Sunday, the 13th, and final deadline is on December 9th. So go check out our mentors, amazing people. Tim Stalinsky, I always mess up his last name. I hope he doesn't see this, who is a publisher at Band of Bards, and Greg Lockhart, who is an editor and a writer himself, who edits people like James Tinian and Jeff Lemire, and is brilliant and super experienced. All right, so we'll jump into it since we're already super late. So I'll welcome in Josh, who is going to take over from here. And if he runs into issues with his connection during the next 50 minutes, you might see my face again. But let's hope it doesn't get to that, because he's way better at panels than I am. So thank you, Josh, for being here again. And thank you all for tuning in, and see y'all later. Enjoy.
Thank you, Noel. As you mentioned, I'm your host, Josh Sippie. I have been having internet issues, so if I cut out, you will see Noel again. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. So today we're talking about the creation of Black the Comic and the world that it's grown into. So let's jump right in and meet our guests. First is Kwanza Osajyefo. He's the creator and author of Black, a story that asks, what if Black people had superpowers? He's worked in comics for nearly 2 decades and began his career in Marvel's online department before moving into other media roles. Kwanza later returned to comics to launch DC Comics web imprint and digital publishing initiatives. Aside from his own projects, Kwanza is a creative architect of Humanoids H1 Comics line. He helped create their flagship titles Ignited, Omni, and Strangelands, and co-wrote Ignited with comics legend Mark Waid. Hello, Kwanza. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for being here. Our
thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Our second guest, Sarah Litt, is an editor at large for Ahoy Comics, the editor and producer of Black the Comic, and a career editor with a host of critically acclaimed graphic novels on her resume. Previously, she has worked at Dynamite Entertainment and DC Comics. She brings a sharp expertise on sequential art storytelling and end-to-end comics production. Hello, Sarah. Welcome as well.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you both for being here. We're going to start. So, Kwanza, I want to start with you. And sort of, we're going to talk about the creation of Black the Comic from sort of its initial stages to how big it's gotten now. It's a whole universe now, which is awesome. So, Kwanza, I want to ask you sort of, where did this whole idea begin for you? Was it something that you've been thinking about for a while, or was there a moment where you were like, oh, you know what, this would be great?
Yeah, it was exactly that. I think what's really interesting about it is that, when we originally launched the Kickstarter back in 2016,
15, something like that.
COVID time just throws everything off about like 2 years.
But like life.
Yeah. So when we launched it, a lot of people thought like, oh, this is really timely and stuff like that, because think it had been just after or around like the Trayvon Martin shooting, but I had actually come up with the concept probably like 10 years prior. And it was one of those things where, it was a mixture not only of just my experience in comics as a person of color, but as, a comic book fan growing up reading this sort of thing. And I think anybody who's ever read comics has always, like seen the characters as like these outsiders, these people who, put on these masks and costumes and sort of fight for a society that's not always accepting of them, or treats them like a monster or what have you. And they're great allegories until you start noticing that, like, wait a second, all these people look great. They live in mansions. They drive, like, they have like fancy jets and stuff. It falls apart a little bit. And so, it was one of those things where, I really thought about, well, what if we stripped that away and got rid of like the allegory? Like, what if only Black people had superpowers? And it's one of those things like that log line pops into your head, and then you're just like, okay, yeah, what if? Like, you've already got this innate groundwork and knowledge of like racial tension and history to like then build the sci-fi upon. And it was just something that I thought like, oh, I should definitely explore this. But I sat on it for 10 years. Until the time is right, until there was like technology and ways to sort of get it out there without, having to go through a publisher. Because I think at the time most publishers would have probably balked at it.
And I do want to get back to that as well, why you went the independent route rather than pitch to a publisher. But I want to hear from Sarah real quick. Sarah, when did you join this project? At what stage in development was it?
Oh, I got the script sometime in 2012 or 2013. So, I mean, this is something I knew about before, I think before Kickstarter even was Kickstarter. It was just sort of like, Kwanza sent me that, we go back because we worked together at DC. So, he sent me the script and he was like, so I have this idea. And here's this script for this idea that I've had for a really long time. And, and I read it over and and I was like, this is great. And so, just again, because life just does what it does, we sort of sat on it. And then when Kickstarter really started making some headway with comics, I think we decided that the time was right, and the stars sort of aligned because we have, Kwanza can tell you how he got everybody on board because he really enjoys that story. But I mean, I was signed on from like years before it was even sort of, before we figured out how to put it out.
Sarah's one of the few people who know the original name for the series that most people don't.
She actually segued perfectly into what I was going to ask you, which is, how did you assemble this team? Because you go on the Black the Comic website and the team is incredible. It's such an impressive team. When did you start putting this team together? Like, was it very early in the process, or where were you whenever you started to assemble this team?
I think in my head and my heart, I had already kind of had the team together, but it was more like, like having a wish list and hoping that happens. I had edited Jamal on the Ray along with Sarah back at DC when we were out in LA, and it was my, I knew Jamal professionally, personally, and stuff like that, but it was the first time I got to edit him on a book, and just seeing him work was so impressive. Really getting to see someone who is just a true master of his craft and just impressed me so well, especially with something where, it was one of those titles that wasn't really high profile. So that meant we could have more fun with it. Like, people don't realize when you don't have a high profile title, you're just like, you can just do all sorts of crazy stuff, like give aliens like Prince high heel shoes. Just kind of enjoy yourself. But just his dedication and craft work like locked into my brain, and I was like, I have to do a project with him. And then this came up, I was like, he's the person. Like, I really hope he'll be on board. So Tim and I actually went over to his house in Brooklyn with the pitch idea, and I thought it was going to be a hard sell, but once I kind of gave the log line, he's like, yeah, no, I'm in, sure. And it was actually funny because Tim got there a little bit later, and I was like, he's already in, we're good. think we didn't have to do like, we were ready to do like a whole like, you know, like magic act. But and the same thing with like Kari. We were at a party, an after party at New York Comic Con, and I just showed him the concept on my phone, and he was like, and I built like a little mini website. I didn't even have to scroll through it. He was just like, nope, nope. So the log line, let's go. That's it. And that was pretty much how we all got started. And Tim like was always kind of like my partner in crime, because we came up with the idea originally together 10 years ago. It was because we had bumped into each other at what was that convention they used to have at the Puck Building? Why is my brain like
Oh, not Mocha, no. Yeah.
yes, Mocha. Yeah, Mocha.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's where you meet all, that's where you've met all everybody.
That is true. That is where I've met most of like the people who are my actual friends in comics, was at Mocha Fest. So yeah, Tim and I reconnected there, and I just really loved the aesthetic of his designs. It was something that I hadn't seen in comics before, and I really wanted to give Black a unique silhouette, and something that came from a perspective that, you know, wasn't really Tim's got a lot of like anime influences, but he also really is into like, you know, fabrics and draping and technology and stuff like that. So I just knew there was going to be there needed to be a different aesthetic for this book, especially, you know, being that it was going to be steeped in like African American culture. You know, it's like we can't do spandex and capes for this. Like that's just not going to work.
And then Sarah, you know, it sounds like what Kwanza's saying, it was so easy to get everyone on board. Were you equally easy to get on board? Like, was this something that you saw and you were like, oh yeah, absolutely?
Yeah.
Don't lie.
Exactly. Yes. No, he said like when he was like, hey, remember that script I sent you like 20 years ago? And I was like, yep, let's go.
What was it that made it? Go ahead.
No.
I was
And
gonna
like,
say,
keep in mind, we were all sort of doing it on spec because it's Kickstarter, right? So there's no guarantee that you're gonna get anything out of it. So like, we're essentially just sort of like putting our trust behind this idea, behind Kwanza and his insane concept. But no, I mean, you know, it's one of those things where we're all just like, this is a fantastic idea. It's unfortunately always timely, but it is. And, you know, and we're just like, let's see how that goes.
mm-hmm. So there wasn't much deliberation from you. It was like a one, as soon as you hear it, you're in.
No, I was
And you've worked on comics. I mean, I want to get a sense for what you do. So you do mostly freelance editing up at that point. Were you seeing a lot of pitches like this? And did this stand out as much as, because it sounds like, even when he talks about it, like it's so easy to pitch, it's so high concept. So it feels like it stands out from everything else. But as an editor who sees pitches a lot, I imagine, was it like so elevated beyond what you're used to seeing?
well, I mean, he will say I'm biased, but this idea was particularly unique, and I had seen not similar pitches, but I had seen things after the fact that were done not necessarily by creators of color, and I was like, you cannot do this. And that's sort of what I think the fundamental thing is that this particular team, this particular writer, this particular co-creators, I'm not saying like they're the only people who could do it, but the way that it evolved and what it became, I think that it could only come from this particular group. And I have seen many amazing pitches, and I have worked on many amazing books, but this one, for a lot of reasons, it's one I'm just very, very proud of.
And then just in general, what do you normally look for when a pitch, like what makes a pitch stand out for you? Is it having a high concept premise, or what is it?
It just has to have something like a different idea, like something that clicks, something that I haven't seen a million times before. Like I don't necessarily, and I realize that this is probably blasphemous, I don't necessarily go for superheroes, unless, you know, so like I work at Ahoy and we have the Wrong Earth, which is sort of very different, like is sort of like the dual world take on superheroes, and which also has Jamal as an artist. But like that's a very unique take on a superhero, but like your ordinary sort of like capes and tights, like I'm just like, give me something new, give me something interesting, give me something that is social commentary without being preachy. Like give me, like, I'm working on something right now that I can't discuss, but it's a really interesting take on a mobster story, right? Like, it's one that I hadn't seen before, and it's one that somebody approached me with and was like, what do you think of this? And I was like, I think we can do something with this, so it has to be something that's sort of also, if, like, of course the writer feels passionately about everything, but if they're pitching either for it to become a series, for it to become a movie, and I think this is, I don't want to say this is even worse, but or if they're pitching something that they've written because they think it's going to get published, as opposed to something that they really like care about or feel passionately about, or really like, I love this idea, I've been thinking about this concept, whatever. To me, that, like, you can kind of see through that, like you can see through something where they don't necessarily, not saying like they don't care, but where it's just not like, this is my heart. Like, I know that the Black team put like every ounce of effort into it, and I know, especially with White, there was so much put into that particular book, for a lot of reasons, but like that one was harder. But it's just one of those things where I want to see your soul. That is very long. That's a very long way around.
No, and it's funny too, because that was the great thing about Kickstarter too, because that felt like a litmus test more than anything else. Like, it's something, just because you're passionate about something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to reach a larger market or resonate with people and stuff like that. But you do it because it has meaning for you first, and usually that's like a point of perspective that does tend to resonate with people, as opposed to saying like, oh, I'm going to do something really cookie cutter or whatever. I mean, and that stuff works too. Formulaic is great, and I think all of us love to shut our brains off on occasion, and just watch something. Some of my favorite movies are shut your brain off. It's like, so that's fair. But yeah, when we did it, I was completely willing to accept people not liking it. I think Obama was still president. Yeah, when we launched it, so I was just like, "Hey, am I just poking the bear? Did we solve racism? We're good, right?"
I love that. And Sarah, I'm glad you brought up the whole superhero thing, because when I first reached out to Kwanza, one of the things I wanted to talk to him about was sort of breathing new life into superheroes, because it just feels so overdone. So I want to get back to that here in a second. But Kwanza, I want to ask you as well. You mentioned that you sat on this idea for 10 years, which to me as a writer, like, I find that so impressive, because I'm that writer who's like, I have an idea, I got to run with it right now. How did you sit on it for so long? Were you still like working on it, like building it out, or was it just sort of hanging out in the background?
If I told you the list of stuff that I'm sitting on, I'd look like I'm in a high chair. It's just there's just tons of ideas, and it was more. There was another aspect to it, which is like my wife basically telling me one day to just pick one. It's like, because I would say all these ideas, she's like, "Well, they all sound great. Pick one, and just do the one that like really speaks to you." And that was definitely like this. So it was in part that, in part like having a great team to support it, but it was also me thinking like, there's no way somebody's not going to think of this at some point. Like, I need to like just put this out there. Like, there's something to this concept. So I'll just do it. There's other things that I've thought of where it's just like, okay, maybe people like that, maybe they won't. We'll see. But this one really felt like there was something that I had tapped into, so I had to do it first.
I love it. And I want to talk about sort of getting it to creation, because you mentioned, sort of not wanting to go the pitching route. So when did you start putting together the plan of bringing this to life? Was it always going to be a Kickstarter project? Was it always going to be that kind of thing? Like, what was the mindset behind taking it from idea to getting it out there?
I honestly had no idea. It was more that, Kickstarter emerged. And to what Sarah said, you started to see comic books and other types of projects really start to flourish on there. And I had to good luck of happening to work near Kickstarter's headquarters at the time. I was working for a little boutique agency in Greenpoint, and that's where their headquarters are. And they were doing all these seminars that I just found out about through the grapevine, and I started going there to their headquarters, like meeting some people and just finding out more about the platform because I'm a bit of a planner and a strategizer, so it's like I really wanted to understand how do you go about doing this? How do you plan for success? How do you really like do something that's going to be impactful? Because while I work in marketing, I know that there's got to be a strategy. There's got to be some prep ahead of it, and we needed to plan as much as we could. And I will say this: there is no planning for a Kickstarter, and like you can plan as much as you want, but to quote Mike Tyson, you have a plan until you get punched in the face. And that could be a good punch or a bad punch, but it's just for us, it was a good punch, but it was definitely one of those things where it's just like, oh, I thought I had all this thing sewn up. Just like, no. Because I mean, just for the fact that like we had planned to like really go for the long haul and we ended up hitting our goal in 3 days. We were just, it was like probably one of the wildest weeks in my life. Just
3
not
days
only
of
hitting
constant refreshing.
yeah, and back then I had the Kickstarter app on my phone, and it used to just ping you every time you got a reward went in, and just 3 days nonstop, like every second, like ping, 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 like it was ridiculous, but it was great. And having on our first day was having people contact us about movie deals, publishing stuff. I was like, we haven't even made the book yet. Like there's that first part, and having to get like managers, lawyers, form an LLC, like all these things that like wouldn't have even considered as a creator, where it's just like I just want to tell a story with my friends and colleagues and put out a book, that's important to me. And now all of a sudden, I've got to be a business, I guess.
And we can't forget to thank David Hyde and Superfan because they did a lot for us too. Like they helped us get the word out. And I think like that definitely, because I know Kickstarters are hard and social media is definitely a great way to get it out, but like hiring an amazing group to do your PR to get the word out was also a major help.
And also help navigate that stuff too, because I mean, with all of the stuff that was coming at the team, just having them on board to like basically be a pipeline, because there was, even with them in place, we were getting bombarded, but just having sort of that funnel was like so helpful for us mentally.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit more about having, because I was going to ask you, how did you get the word out? Because that you don't just get $90,000 by just saying, hey, we're going to put it out there and see what happens. So what sort of steps were you taking to get it out there?
So it was very similar. Like we had worked with David Hyde at DC, and knew that he had his own company, Superfan, and they were doing PR and stuff for comic book projects, and we had seen some projects that they'd done before. So approached him with the concept, and another like instant get, just like, oh yeah, this sounds really, I can pitch this to media outlets. And that was really what kind of helped light the fire under a lot of it, because he was able to get us in the New York Times. That led to like Vox, Verge. It's basically like once you're in the Times, everybody else just starts like lining up, in the Wall Street Journal, just all over the place. And then the next thing you know, you're just like having this story told, but with legitimate interest. So it's like interesting to see PR storytelling where yes, you want to get into a notable place, but then also have people authentically see it and want to talk to you about it. It's like, oh, I might have not seen that, but thankfully that it was in the Times. That's a crazy interesting story. Like, we want to interview you, and once you do that, then that's just linking back to the Kickstarter, and it like just becomes this self-perpetuating machine.
Sarah, had you worked on many projects that had gotten this kind of support? I mean, just looking at the numbers, it's pretty impressive. More than impressive. It's pretty amazing what it did. But was this something that was it surprising to you to see that kind of support for it?
It wasn't surprising to me at all. I mean, it was such a good hook and it was such a good premise. And it was sort of at the beginning of the 2016 presidential situation, let's say.
Mhm.
Mostly because I can't remember the word that I want. But no, I mean, this did not surprise me at all. It was an amazing concept, and I think because of its uniqueness, it really sort of like just the tagline alone, what if only Black people have superpowers, leads the way to so many. It's a question that has so many answers, that you sort of need to find out what happens. Like, it's just, there's just a pressing urge to find out what happens.
Mhm.
And at the time, the only other Kickstarter I had worked on was one in, I think, 2011 or something, the Womanthology anthology that came out well, way back then, was the only one, and that also did quite well, so we could just say that I'm a good luck charm. But unfortunately, I did have to step away from that one because I was in the process of moving with DC from New York to LA, so I didn't want to commit to something and not be able to give it my full attention.
And
Which
then and I want to ask you both too, because you come from a background of working in comics when this project came out. How much did that background help you, or did it at all? Sarah, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, I think if I had sort of walked into comics blind, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. But and that goes for any job. I mean, but sort of knowing how to, make sure that things worked, that concepts work, because for a different book in the sort of black universe, in the black superpowers universe, there was an idea that had come up that I sort of sorry, there was a mosquito that I was trying to kill.
I thought you were trying to virtually strike me.
What? There was an idea that came up that was absolutely, I was like, we're not doing this because it is a terrible, overdone idea that I refuse to do, and it's cliche. So having that background definitely helped put the end to that. Would you say, Kwanza?
I would say that having an editor is a necessity. I think a lot of people, maybe not as much now. I think people have definitely started to realize that having an editor on board not only helps in terms of like managing the project overall, but having a sounding board across, all aspects of production, from, the concept into the writing to the pencils to the lettering. I think it's something where you really need that objective eye, because you can get far into the weeds, and sometimes you need somebody to, like, when you come up for air, say like, well, you wasted your time down there. But that's okay. It's what you want, because you can, fall in love with something a little too much. You can start eating your own dog food and miss certain things in your own project that you really sort of don't want to represent the work in a sense. You want to refine it, you want to whittle it down. I definitely like to be pretty raw in the approach, and then like kind of like work it into something. And it's great having like Sarah and a team where I could just throw just like a nonsensical concept, or like, a scene or something like that, and just have that, come back to me. So like, okay, but that doesn't actually make sense to the story. Or, hey, remember that one plot point that you didn't tie up? We're on issue 5 now. When are we gonna like deal with that?
Yeah, and then I think that, sometimes for writers, because ultimately, initially, you're kind of writing in a bubble, like, and you can say, like, you can ask your friends, like, what do you think? And sometimes they'll be honest with you, and sometimes they won't be honest with you. But, I think it helps to, like, essentially an editor's job is to be objective, right? And to say, like, you know, and Kwanza and I are very good friends, and he still knows that I'll be objective and be like, that is terrible.
Or great, or genius.
Great, but that's not the point of the story. But so sometimes you're sort of riding in a bubble, and having an objective eye also really helps.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, y'all are doing a great job of answering questions before I even asked them. I was going to ask the value of having an editor on the project, and you covered that all on your own. So I want to cover more of the Kickstarter process. It's such a big thing that so many people are going to go through in one way or another. So Kwanza, the question, I'm going to elaborate a little bit. The question is going to be, how did you know you were ready to launch the Kickstarter? But did you feel like you were ready? Did you feel like, let's just give it a shot? How much prep work did you do to get set for that moment of launch?
So I did a lot of research. I did a lot of interrogation among Kickstarter itself and its staff. And thankfully, they have people on staff who are like outreach for different genres of either like literature, like science, all of these different like industries and categories and stuff, so that people who are adding new stuff to their platform have somebody to kind of as a go-to. So I did a lot of research on like average pricing, on like fulfillment, stuff like that, which I could honestly have done ages of research on and still not be fully and truly equipped for that sort of thing, because again, at that time at Kickstarter, a lot of that was still fairly new, so the things that I prepared for, like compensation and use of funds and stuff like that, I felt like I calculated pretty fairly. But then there were other things that I didn't, like tax the where it's like you just come around and it's like, wait, you want how much of this money now in New York State? It's like, okay, it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't get to keep all of this magical gift money. But there's ways of doing that now as well, and organizing your funds. But at the time, like, it's just an unknown. So there wasn't like any real moment aside from when I thought I had exhausted everything I could think of, before it was time to launch, and then launch the project. It's like, oh, do I have a compelling like write up? I got one of my good friends, my old roommate, to shoot our video because he's a videographer and stuff like that. We went to the studio and like did this whole like spiel, like, which today I don't think I'd ever do again, because I'm just like, oh god, it's just so awkward. Like it feels cringy now, but
it resulted in the best picture that has ever happened.
The luminescent picture. Yeah. There's a picture of all of us and Sarah's like in the middle, but the lighting for the camera just was not balanced. So it's balanced for all of us except her. So she looks like she's glowing.
I look like a ghost. It's amazing.
But yeah, so it was as much production as preparation as I could, and then you just kind of at some point you pull the block out and you roll down the hill.
And was what was the status of the project? Like, how far along was it? Is there, what I'm trying to get here, is there a right time in the creation of the project to say, okay, it's Kickstarter time?
I think depending on the person now, like hindsight's always 2020 and stuff like that. And like I definitely had a roadmap, a book map, and Tim had also done a lot of book production because he had done that for Marvel for many years. So we knew what we were doing and stuff. But in terms of like, getting things into production, we hadn't started any like the artwork or anything like that because we have to pay for Jamal and Kari's time and stuff. So it's one of those things where it's like, if it didn't work out, I didn't want to say like, all right, well, like that, like used up all of your time and it didn't actually pan out. It's more like, hey, we hit this goal, we know we're good, and then we tripled that. So it's like, I think we're really good, guys. let's go make a book. And that changed, a lot of things, because originally the plan was to just do it as like a little, graphic novel. But then as things started to play out, like, Black Mass got involved, like, and all this other stuff. And, Kari's covers really inspired like a lot of thought on like how we could, do this as periodicals. So once that came into play, it was just like, oh, we've kind of set such a tone here. I think we could have some fun with this. And then that just became the 6 covers that I think everybody knows the the first chapter for.
There it is.
I can't present your wall, but there you go.
I appreciate the attempt.
And that segues really well into, I was gonna, get into how this went from just that first story to the big universe it is now, which has gone through more Kickstarter campaigns. It's now got Orphans and Widows, it's got Black AF, it's got White coming out, it's got all these great titles coming out in this same universe. Was that always the plan, or did you kind of see the interest and you're like, oh, let's just keep going with it?
A little bit of both. I think the intent was, if it worked out to do it as a trilogy, so my lofty plans were to, kind of ape Star Wars and have like, Black is like New Hope, White is Empire Strikes Back, and in the third book, will be Return of the Jedi. And that's kind of like the arc that I like to draw upon it, because it's a great 3-part act. It's like yay, savior, oh crap, and then like, oh, we actually have to work for this. So the other books that spun out of it did come from like, the reaction to it. And America's Sweetheart had always been in my mind as a book to do, but it was more of a, like, could I get away with this? So even when I brought it up to Black Mask, they were like, oh, when will the sequel come out? And I very much was not the kind of person who just likes to fill shelf space. So I'm like, well, I need to work out the second part of it, but there's this other idea that I have that would happen in the universe, but I want to do it as a YA book. And Matt Mazzola, like the publisher of Black Mask, was like, oh, wait, what? You want to follow Black with like, I was like, trust me. I was like, I think this will, and it's going to be full color. He's like, wait, the first book was black and white. Now this one's going to be full color for YA. I was like, yeah, it's going to be self-contained. Like, we're not even going to do it as, it's going to be like a YA book. And it turns out, like, America's Sweetheart is actually the most popular of the universe, I think, because it's just the easiest to, like, put in libraries, hand off to like young people, and also kind of graduate them into like the larger universe. So it's like, as an entry point, it's an interesting, small, self-contained story that if you want to find out more about, or you maybe grow a little bit older from when you get it, you can like step into that universe. But it was also a part of me wanting to tell different kinds of stories in the universe, and not, Black is a trilogy like that Star Wars thing, but then I want to do like the Han Solos, the Bad Batches, the Andors. I just watched the latest episode of that, and I was just like, oh my god, this series is
So good.
It's so good. It's like
Yes.
painful. It's like, oh my god, like Luke Skywalker was on easy mode, dude.
I've been saying One Way Out all day. I've just been repeating it in my head, One Way Out, which is not going to age well, because when people listen to this a year from now, they're going to be like, what? But anyway, so Sarah, I want to bring the editor's perspective into play here, because this universe is expanding, it's becoming more stories. Did that make your job harder, or did you always like see it going this way as well?
I mean, I think if you have a good idea and people want to read more about it, then you should definitely give them more. And I think that, as with any, with any given sort of just general superhero book, you always end up, like a team book, you always end up having your favorites. And I think that we sort of figured out kind of more who our favorites were, I think, and we're like, let's do this. And I always knew that Black was going to be a trilogy. So that was not even a question. And then Kwanza was like, let's do YA. And I was like, okay, cool. And then he's like, let's have Kursk. And I was like, okay, we're not doing that. That was another discussion that we had. And then everybody really loved the character of Nancy, and Tim loved that character. So we did Widows and Orphans. That's Widows and Orphans, right? Sorry.
It's okay. I forget too sometimes. So I have to go back and reread stuff. I'm like, I wrote this. Why don't I remember it?
And then we had Devil's Die, which is absolutely wonderful. And that team is like, two of my favorite people are on that team, and I still will, you know, I still am like, Leanna, please do this thing for me. And Leanna's like, okay, I'll do this thing.
I think it's great because we also, you know, again, got to play with different genres. You know, Widows and Orphan was sort of me and Tim's love letter to like anime and ninja stuff. We're like, oh, we want to do a ninja story. Can we do a ninja story in as well? I was like, yes, we can. You know, and then Devil's Eye was, you know, trying to do something a little bit more noir. You know, something that wasn't as, you know, not an illustrator, so I don't know any illustrative terms, but you know, not as defined as Jamal's art is. Like Jamal's art is definitively like, you know,
well,
comics and superheroes and I think Liana's, yeah, she has a different art style the same way that like Jennifer Johnson has an art style that's YA. You know, it's just like playing the same universe but in different keys and tones and shades. I enjoy that.
No, with Liana, you always know what their art looks like. But, you know, and I think that kind of comes all the way back to something we were talking about in the beginning, when you were talking about, you know, going sort of, instead of pitching to a big company and just sort of doing it on our own, we wouldn't necessarily be able to tell these stories if we had gone to to a bigger publisher. If we, you know, and I'm not saying like they would have said no, but doing it on our own and doing it with Black Mask, we were given really a lot of leeway to sort of go, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to figure out how to pay for it. Please put our book out. Yes, we'll put your book out. Awesome. and
that's been lucky that it worked.
Really sort of like I mean, definitely there's a lot more hustle than pitching. Well, not even maybe. But I think that, as I said, I think that we sort of gave ourselves a lot more either leeway or to hang ourselves with, depending. It's a terrible term, and I apologize for using that. But I think we sort of, you know, wrote our own story, figuratively, literally, however you choose to interpret that.
And we've been lucky that it's, you know, worked as well. You know, I think now maybe now I've finally reached a point with Matt Pizzola where he trusts my insanity a little bit more. You know, I think White kind of put that one down for him, where it was just sort of like, all right, so for my next trick, we're only going to do 2,500. Wait, what? You know, and it's like, trust me, there's a method to this madness. You know, and it's really been about like what Sarah said, like us trying to tell our own story and carve our own path in a way that feels right to the project and to each of us, and I think that's been really fulfilling. You know, and I think it's come through for the readers as well, because it's not something, again, where we're just like, hey, we're out with like, you know, next part of product, you know, X, and it's gonna be this. You know, there's no like, you know, all brand new, all different.
We like the element of surprise.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what's great about books. Like I love manga and I love literature, and those are the things that I sort of draw from in the way that like I approach comics, and that like stories should feel exciting. You know, as toxic as an example as this might be, it's like there's, you know, an energy around, you know, the Harry Potter books each time a new one came out, you know, but each one was also a unique part of like a larger tapestry and had its own like imprint and sort of like themes to it and stuff. And I wish you would see more of that in comics, and that's what we're trying to do. So that's why like the sequel to Black isn't called like More Black or Blacker. It's White. You know, it's like that is the sequel, you know. And while it might be difficult for people to kind of categorize or like put into like book scan and stuff like that, I kind of don't care. that's the name of the book. I don't know how to make that not be it for you, you know, and to call like the next part Black again, with, you know, it's just like it wouldn't make any sense to me.
So then, if I can ask, do you have a title for the Return of the Jedi, the trilogy? What's the third one going to be?
The third one is going to be Gray. And yes, I've been revealing that now that we're out of pandemic, like post-pandemic, like mildly pandemical. I don't know. So it's like, that's the third book, and that's going to kind of wrap up the core part of the trilogy, and also answer the log line like of why only Black people have superpowers. So I know that's been like a pressing question, for a lot of people, which I find funny because that's sort of that suspense of belief is like the key part of all sci-fi and superhero stuff. It's like you don't know how it works. Like, why are you asking? But I think in particular because it has this defining question as part of its mythos, people want to know that more. It's like I can't just say mutants. Like, gamma radiation, like it's like cosmic rays. People are just like, oh no, I'll totally accept that. Like, what?
They're all squirrels.
Like, I love that stuff, but I mean, come on, like gamma radiation will kill you. I mean, I know it's superheroes, but still.
I wanna ask about Sarah. We'll start with you on this one. This is a universe that has themes and like very, very heavy themes in it that don't, there's always that fine line between, focusing on story, focusing on theme. And I want to get your take on sort of how you strike that balance between story and theme, or if it's something that just happens organically with creators.
I mean, I think it depends. You kind of find the theme, I think, as you go along, and it depends. Like, not every book necessarily has the deeper meaning. Some of them do, some of them don't. Like this particular book clearly very much does, and I think it grew organically, and knowing how it ends, it definitely grew sort of organically, and it grew out of a number of other things that have, I think, come up more. Things that have come up more recently. But plenty of things, plenty of stories are just great stories. Like I am working on something else for Ahoy that I can't talk about that is essentially just fun, because like, look, in this 2020 almost 3, we need that. But we also need stories like Black, because that sort of is such an essential part of who we are and who we are now, and I think really who we kind of always have been, that we need sort of both. And to bring it back to the actual question that you asked me, I think it depends. Like I know that there was sort of like a conceptual theme, obviously, what if only Black people have superpowers? But I think that it wasn't force-fed to the reader, which I think is sort of key if you do want that kind of, if you do want to have a theme, if you do want to have a sort of high concept book, being preachy is not necessarily the most ideal way to go, which isn't to say that it's bad. Like you're the writer, and as an editor, my job is to help you create the best book that you can. But if it feels like a slog to me, then it's going to feel like a slog to your reader. And that's sort of where I feel like you have to kind of make sure that your theme and your concept flows with the writing and doesn't sort of take precedent or take the reader out of what you are trying to do, or it doesn't take them out of your story, because honestly there's nothing worse than being yanked out of a story by like something preachy.
Or just anything. I feel like there was something that we talked about recently, some show, movie, or whatever, where there was one point where you get yanked out, and I was just like, oh, that was so abrasive.
Oh, I remember. I don't remember what it was, but I remember this conversation.
Right, and I don't remember what it was, but it was just something that was jarring, and it was something that I enjoyed. But like, there's just this one part where you just go yoink, and you're just like, that wasn't even on purpose. That was just a bad part of this story. And it's weird because I
Yeah.
don't like to talk in those terms because there's just so much like negative reviews of things and like, you know, hot takes and bad takes. But this was just more from like a technical point of view. I'm just kind of like, okay. I mean, I guess that's where we are, but it, you like, I was in it and then I got like kind of derailed. Like somebody yanked the VR helmet off, you know,
Kind of
for a second. Just like,
Yeah,
So
no, I remember this conversation distinctly. I cannot for my life remember what it was that we were talking about.
it'll come back to us way later.
Yeah.
Kwanza, as the writer, I'm always curious how writers grapple with theme and if you actively think about it or if you just write and trust that the theme will follow along with where you're going. Are you somebody that sort of actively engages with the theme?
Yeah, I mean, each chapter of Black and White have themes, and that's something that we tried to capture in the
Mm,
covers. But that's kind of the weird, interesting thing about something like theme because I had to have already written everything to kind of know what the theme would be like. So
mm,
it was like the theme didn't finish baking until I did the rest of the work. So
mm,
it's kind of like they're operating in sync with each other, you know, and it could change some parts of it, you know. So I think for me it was just about like using that as like a north star that you can move,
mm,
which sounds kind of weird, where it's just sort of like, you know, it's like, okay, here's my guiding light until I don't like it anymore. And then maybe as I'm going along and be like, oh, okay, here's some other aspect of it that I hadn't thought about as I was like getting through this story. But like, oh, I think the theme is this
mm.
now, you know. And in other cases, just like, nope, that was it all the way down. That's what we're dealing with here. So it's not something that I feel like is um really set in stone at any
Mm.
certain point. You know, it's sort of just like guardrails, you know, for where you're trying to go, and ones that you can kick over at any time.
Mm. And then we're almost out of time here. So last thing I want to give you both the chance to do is promote. Where can people find you? What's coming up? All the links that you mentioned, we're going to include in the show notes. So throw every link out there that you want, how people can find you, what books they can find, all that good stuff. Let's start with you, Kwanza.
Sure. You can find all of the Black books from the universe on blackmassstudios.com and purchase them directly from the publisher. Humanoids backslash I think H1 Comics is where you can get Ignited, Omni, and Strangelands. And you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram as at Kwanzaa, and I have just migrated away from Twitter, and now I'm on Mastodon. Like I'm not like I had my fill like on Halloween. I was like, I'm not gonna be on this bird thing. Like it has to change hands. So you could just find me on Mastodon. I don't know how people search on there yet, so I'm the only Kwanzaa so far. So that's a great starting point. Like, you know, figure it out. We all are. But it's actually really fun, and a lot of comics creators are popping up there now, and it's felt like the first time I've been able to like reconnect with a lot of people,
Mm,
but like and follow without like, you know, all the noise of Twitter. So
mm.
there you
I
go.
have to get through your follow list.
And then Sarah, your turn to promote whatever you have coming up and where people can find you.
I am Sarah Starlit on Instagram and also on Mastodon. Um, um, and yeah, and I have no idea what I'm doing on Mastodon, so that's a good time. It's a learning curve for everybody, I think. I also suggest checking out, let me just make sure that I have the correct website because it is, I also suggest checking out comicsahoy.com, where you can find such wonderful books as Billionaire Island, Cult of Dogs, which came out today by the brilliant Mark Russell and Steve Pugh and Chris Chuckery. And what else is coming out? And Highball by Stuart Moore, which is delightful and drunken space hijinks, if you like that kind of thing. And lots of other stuff. It's actually a really good time. There are very, very few legitimate superheroes. They all have some sort of issue within the issues. but it's actually a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. Yeah, and all the Black superhero stuff that Kwanza talked about, and oh gosh, a bunch of stuff that I can't talk about yet.
Well,
come back next year, and then we'll
that's right. We'd love to have you. Sarah, Kwanza, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. We loved having you here.
That was a great time and a great chat.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah. So to all of our listeners, we're going to be back in 2 weeks talking to Junie Ba. So you can find sign up on the Negative Space website, and we'll see you then. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.